This program is made possible, in part, by the Ohio Humanities Council under a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities.
What we got coming?
All fine.
Here was something fresh, this thing of getting up in the middle of the night to go to work. It was a detail in piloting that had never occurred to me. I knew boats ran all night, but somehow it never happened to reflect that somebody had to get out of a warm bed to run them.
Get you over there.
Mark Twain wrote those words about the hard facts of round-the-clock watches in 1870 as he looked back on his career as a Cub steamboat pilot. Since then, in fact, since the beginning of river transportation, there have been men and women on the working river 24 hours a day, taking products from one place to another. Their skills and traditions have been handed down through the years, and many are still carried on by Ohio's modern towboat crews.
My name is Captain Jim Coomer. I've worked on the rivers for 30 years, and I built this flatboat with the help of students of the Inland Waterways Occupation School. The rivers were the nation's highways in the 18th and early 19th centuries.
In the 1700s, settlers came to Ohio via the river, in dugouts and canoes at first, and then boats like this one. The flatboat would be about 15 or 20 feet across and as long as needed to carry the family's household goods. Oxen and wagon, chickens, goats, pigs, dogs, sheep, and children. The flatboat only went one way, downstream. The oars kept it out of the range of obstructions and helped guide it over falls. Once you got where you were going, you would tear it down and use the lumber to build your home. This boat was the forerunner of the keelboat, the mainstay of early river commerce because it could navigate upstream as well as down. Getting upstream was still no picnic. You would have to pole against the current or take it upstream by cordelling. You'd send a small boat ahead with men and a long tow rope, which you'd fasten to a tree perhaps 250 feet upstream. Everybody would pull the keelboat up to the tree and then start all over again.
In 1811, the steamboat came along. For 15 or 20 more years, men continued to run keelboats downstream. The keelboaters would sell their boats when they reached New Orleans and often return home as deck passengers on steamboats.
These boats were vital to the expansion of the West, coming on the scene long before highways or railroads. After a while, the steamboats so increased in number and speed, they were able to absorb the entire commerce. The keelboatman became a deckhand or a mate or a pilot on a steamboat. When these jobs were not open to him, he took a berth on a coal flat or a log raft, another way of getting goods down the river that persisted into the late 19th century. The early steamboats, or packets, were single boats which transported both people and goods. As their popularity grew, the packets carried the passengers on the second deck, while the first was crammed with livestock, produce, and cargo. They have been described as a combination tea kettle and chicken coop. The boats would stop and pick up a crate of chickens, a pig, or a keg of nails or passengers any place they were hailed. At the River Museum in Marietta, Ohio, we have the oldest surviving pilot house of the type of packet Mark Twain knew. Saved from the wreck of the steamboat Tell City, it is relatively small and plain. The W.P. Snyder, also on display at Marietta, is a direct ancestor of today's diesel towboats. She is typical of the steam-powered towboats that ran on Ohio's rivers along with the packets.
After the Civil War, as the railroads took over the passenger traffic and some of the smaller consignment freight and did a better service job on it, we have the towboats coming in to handle the heavy bulk cargoes, and that's where the profit and the commerce has come on the rivers. And that's what's led now to the diesel towboats that you see on the rivers today. We'd have the W.P. Snyder Jr., for example. This boat was built in 1918 for the sole purpose of towing coal barges from the mines in the hills of Pennsylvania down to the steel mills at Pittsburgh. They call them towboats, but actually the barges are pushed ahead. You have tow knees up forward, and the barges are lashed up forward so that the whole unit, with all the barges and the boat, become one massive boat. In other words, powered by the towboat. So the towboat really is just the engine, and the rest of the boat are the barges in front. From the needs for coal, we now have them carrying all sorts of bulk cargoes, grain, fuels, chemicals, anything that you would need. Sometimes if you don't get enough salt on your road in the wintertime, that's because the barges have been frozen in at a lock somewhere, and the ice in the river has prevented them from getting up.
Many changes have occurred on the rivers of the Mississippi watershed. Formerly, these waterways were unpredictable with dangerous chutes and falls. On the other hand, seasons of low rainfall could leave a boat high and dry. The crews would have to grasshopper the boat. That is, lift it along with spar poles in a series of jumps. With their shallow-hulled boats, pilots claimed they had to run on a heavy dew. The building of locks and dams turned the upper Mississippi and the Ohio into a series of controlled lakes, with plenty of water always available on which to navigate. At first, the dams were hand-operated wooden wickets. Now, they are powerful hydraulic systems. In the early 1800s, the government put lights along the shore and began sending out snag boats to pull dangerous fallen trees and other driftwood out of the river. Mark Twain wrote, "This thing has knocked all the romance out of piloting. The government snag boats go patrolling up and down, pulling the river's teeth. Formerly, if your boat got away from you on a black night and broke for the woods, it was an anxious time with you. With abundant beacons and the banishment of snags and a compass to fight the fog with, piloting is now nearly as safe and simple as driving a stage."
Frankly, Mr. Twain, I think you're talking with your safety valve tied down. You never had to pilot a modern diesel towboat with 24,000 tons of coal or high-octane gasoline. We need all the navigational aids we can get.
A modern towboat, like the William F. Pletner, for example, with a full load of 15 barges, equals the length of 3 football fields. Her enormous loads must be gotten into lock chambers with just a few feet to spare.
The death of river commerce and traditions has been predicted many times, but both still survive. Some 150 million tons of cargo are shipped annually on the Ohio River.
Today's river people can be seen working and living according to long-established patterns in a world that is both beautiful and dangerous.
City 4534, the Omega is northbound at Cedar Branch. City 4534, the Omega. City 4534.
One of the best historians of river tradition is Captain Fred Way. a man known to everyone on America's inland waterways. Each year, he gets together in Marietta with other steamboat veterans, river buffs, and the crew members of working boats to exchange river lore. Captain Way started on the river as a young man and spent 45 years as pilot and steamboat owner. He's written 7 books about his experiences.
We have this organization, the Sons and Daughters of Pioneer Rivermen. We started it with about 6 or 8 people, and I thought they were old-timers. I thought, boy, when these die off, why, this is the end of this. But no, now we have kids, grandsons, great-grandsons coming into this, and daughters. Everybody has a ball when they come to these meetings that we have. And that's the reason, because it's just a carryover, it's a tradition.
Keep on rolling down your river, keep on rolling down your river, keep on rolling down your river blue.
There's always been a romance about the river. Mark Twain wrote, "There was but one permanent ambition among my comrades in our village, and that was to be a steamboatman. Now and then we had hopes that if we lived and were good, God might let us be pirates. But the ambition to be a steamboater always remained."
Captain Russell Chick Lucas, one of the finest pilots on the Ohio River during his 42-year career on packet boats, steamboats, and diesels, was 5 years old when Mark Twain died. Boats did everything when Chick started on the river. They took people to visit their relatives, delivered the mail, hauled logs and other cargo, provided services, enlightenment, and entertainment. There was even a photography boat. Captain Lucas's life shows that boys have continued to yearn for the river in the Twain tradition.
There was something there that had me tied up with the river in a boat, because day or night I'd hear a boat whistle, I was gone to the river. You know that something drives you on these things, because when I would hear a boat whistle when I was younger, my mother had an organ, and old-fashioned pump organ, and I would try to listen for that boat and take the notes on that organ and make them sound like the whistle on that boat. Now, to me, when I look back today after all these years, something was in me that about water, about boats.
We were in high school, we'd skip, go up there and ride boats. That's what we would do. And of course, we were young, then we liked to wave at our friends we went by because we were steering the boat, and that was a pretty good deal. So we'd do that, and that way we'd see we could work like an hour, steer a day. Well, we'd ride for a week, you know, get to do that. So that's the way I started off. My dad was an engineer, and I was steering on it and playing. And when I would get to go by home, well, then my mother would catch me when I waved at everybody. She'd get me off and back to school.
Although I didn't come from a river family, living in Paducah on the Ohio River bank, I had a lot of friends that are river people, and I would hear the river stories, but at the time I had children to raise. I used to take my children down on the river bank for picnics and watch the boats go by and wonder where they're going, what their cargo was, and what the destination. So after my children grew up and all are doing well on their own, I thought, what I do with the rest of my life now? So the answer to that was do what you've been thinking about for 10 years, get a job cooking on the river.
I'm from South Louisiana, 99, 100% Cajun. I was born and raised on the river. We had to go to school. Our school bus was a boat. We had to travel, I guess, about 5-6 miles by boat to go to school. All our traveling was by boat.
this little boat of evenings after it come in from Portsmouth would take us down 2 or 3 miles as kids and give us a piece of candy or an ice cream cone or something. And we'd carry on freight so they could get it on the boat, come back up and lay there all night and be ready to leave the next morning. So the other kids would stay down on the deck, but I'd get up on the second deck and watch this pilot, and he was in a wheelchair. He was crippled by the name of Hamilton. And I would watch him turn that wheel. And so he looked around and seen me standing out there one evening, and he said, "You want to come in here?" And I said, "Yes," because they had a sign, nobody in the pilot. So I went in, and he said, "What do you think of this?" And I said, "Well, okay, I guess." But anyway, he said, "You think you could steer a boat?" And I said, "Well, I think I could. I think I can." He said, "Well, steer this one." So that was a thrill that I remembered for years, because that pilot wheel was, I thought, awful big, which was a very small one when I look back on it now. And he let me get a hold of that thing, and I thought, well, this is something, that I could steer a boat.
The verbs to teach and learn mean the same in river parlance. If you want to learn your job, you got to find somebody willing to learn it to you, and you'll learn by experience. Mark Twain quotes an old-time mate: 4 years at West Point with plenty of books and schooling will learn a man a good deal, I reckon, but it won't learn him the river.
You got to be kind of easy with them at first, because a new deckhand, you know, he just don't have any idea of what's going on, and you got to watch them real close to keep them from getting hurt. That's number one. Then as they go along and watch other men work and listen to the mate, they will pick it up finally. You know, some faster than others, naturally.
The way to go from deck work to the pilot house is still through one-to-one learning, by asking questions, getting a chance to do, and incidentally, carrying the captain a cup of coffee.
I learned my job on the boat, laying wires, getting barges up and down the river, making locks, single locks. We was locking 5 barges at a time when I first started. Now we're locking 15 at a time.
There was a friend of mine, an older lady, that had cooked on the river for 13 years. So when I decided to come on the river as a cook, there isn't any school or anything that you can go to, but I went to her every afternoon and took notes, and she gave me so many helpful recipes, and on the side of her recipe card she had these marvelous notations of how the crew would enjoy this and that, and just helpful things that unless you've been out here you just never would think of. It's such a complete different life from any job on the bank.
Stories of the apprenticeship of pilots abound. Most were helped by friendly mentors out of the goodness of their hearts. And others...
Our boat, the boat that I was on, never made a landing after it left Maysville. We'd leave Maysville and then they'd pay off. And the officers would get in the captain's room and play poker. Well, they need some open river, and I got so I could steer pretty good, so this pilot would say to me, now he'd go down and play poker and leave me up there to steer. And if I seen a boat coming, I'd holler down through a little tube that was in the captain's room, get him up. Well, that's the way I do it. Every minute I could get to steer when I wasn't clerking, why, I'd get up there and steer. And of course they like to have somebody, because you had to pull that old wheel up and down. That was no easy job. Well, anyway, that's the way I got to be a pilot.
Me and Sonny Simpkins. Yeah, Bob Neal, he's a fellow taught, well, he taught several of us younger fellas, you know, and he let us steer, and he learned us. Back then we didn't get much time off. So he let us steer, and he'd get off ahead of the boat and stuff of that nature too. But he did learn us and brought us up the line. If you'd ask him today, you know, who put the gray hairs in his head, he would tell you that me and Sonny Simpkins put them in there. But I don't know that we did put all of them in there, but few, I guess. But he did learn us. He was a hard man to steer for, very firm, but a good man.
Riverboats are run by a team. Each person is responsible for an area of work, and each area has its own traditions and standards. The captain has always been the head man, of course. When the boat is underway, his authority is absolute. His character sets the pattern for the crew. Today's towboat captain also pilots on one of the 6-hour watches. In addition, he maintains safety regulations, keeps the boat accounts, settles labor and personal disputes, makes the most difficult navigational decisions, keeps the boat logged, and is father confessor to the crew.
Captain always seems to know what is going on throughout the entire boat. At all times he seems to know where everyone is and if they're doing their job or not, and just exactly what is going on. And he has so much on his mind to keep the boat in the channel down the river, but with all he has in the wheelhouse, he still keeps complete control of the boat.
In the 19th century, pilots were the lords of creation and have continued to enjoy special status. Twain said, "I think pilots were about the only people I ever knew who failed to show embarrassment in the presence of traveling foreign princes. Not even the President of the United States may enter a pilot house without asking permission. Packet and early towboat pilots were celebrities in their world and were higher paid than the captain."
Eb Klein was one of the old-time pilots on the river. And he'd been down in South America for a long time. He'd quite versatile. And he was a very independent character. And he was on the Corker, a boat called the Corker, when I was with him. And I liked old Eb, and old Eb had no authority. I mean, he didn't look to any authority. Even the captain was beneath his dignity. And I just couldn't help but admire anybody that could be so independent. He was one of the type that if King of England came on the boat, he'd say, "Who are you? You're not allowed in the pilot house."
LXD 279 of Michelle McBride to the Buckle.
Welcome to Michelle McBride.
Michelle Barker, Champ 10.
Okay, let's try.
It is the tradition of the pilot house to make things look easy, no matter how frightening or dangerous. The Ohio River's channel is narrow and full of traffic. The boats navigate close to the bottom. Some unfortunate pilots occasionally hit bottom. In spite of modern equipment like radar and the depth finder, ways of outwitting the river and all its hazards remain a big concern.
Well, we have in high water, like the Cincinnati bridges. We have Louisville-Portland Canal. We have the bends, and what is known down here as the oxbow country. It's crooked, hard steering. And then when, in the summer months, we have the motor boats in the big harbors, Madison, Louisville, Cincinnati, different ones. And then the Galpliss Lock is one of the bigger ones that we all dread. It's a big hazard we have out here. We have to watch it real close, especially in the high water again, when we need to be, you know, within feet of what we're going to run. And others is, you know, if we got a lot of room, we're all right. But if we don't have a lot of room, we got problems. And the Louisville Canal, and that is one of them. It's a real close place, and it needs to be lighted better.
Navigating in this kind of weather here is not bad. It's what we call smooth sailing. But we get a lot of thunderstorms, high winds, tornadoes, and kind of rough waters We have to be careful with these loads in this rough water. Keep them from getting swamped over. With high winds, it's hard to maneuver to try to get into the lock with empty barges, because it's just like a sailboat then. Yes, you get a little gray hair.
In the present day of navigation, we're so used to radar and assistance to pilots' helpers electronically and everything. You take it for granted nowadays, but back in the time when I first started, it was quite primitive. And, well, for instance, we steered by hand. We didn't have any assistance. You had a great big pilot wheel, and you had to pull that thing over by hand. And when you ran the headlight, you pulled wires and ropes that you could fix. You didn't have to call any expert in to adjust these things. And if the headlight didn't come on, why, you had a lump of coal and you threw it out there, and you got to be pretty expert at hitting that thing, and it would bring life back into its vitals again. Operating in that primitive kind of a way. It didn't even have any glass in front of the pilot house. It was just wide open, even in the wintertime. They didn't want anything to interfere with what they could hear out ahead.
Now, Captain Fred Way tells a wonderful story in his book, Piloting Comes Natural, about how the old-timers relied on their senses to tell their whereabouts. Way writes, Captain Dayton Randolph was taking the General Crowder through a shutout fog when he asked young Way to listen for the sound of a barking dog. This dog always barked at a certain place on the shore. On hearing the sound, Way proudly reported, "There's your dog," to which Randolph replied coolly, "No, that's a beagle. The dog I'm looking for is a hound dog with a brown patch over his starboard eye."
And that's the way we were going down the river. Of course, we were going slow, and they had other schemes that they had learned to use. They would make the boat come ahead full head and then stop her and back up and let the waves go ahead. And then they could hear them breaking on the shore, and they could tell from where this sound was coming from which direction the shore was, and get along that way. Made many a mile that you couldn't see anything, just with all these homemade methods. It was always interesting to watch that. I finally learned to do it myself.
The old-timers used instinct and observation. Signposts like a clump of sycamore trees were called a pilot's friend because it could be seen in the dark. When the radar's down, today's pilots may still use the old ways.
Then a method that the old pilots used was the shadows on the water and the old pools. They used them to navigate by, just stay out of the shadows, you know, and they'd keep you out of the shallow water. We also used the method of a rolled up newspaper or wadded up paper towel or something. We'd throw it in the river and watch, and we could judge the current by that, how fast we was dropping down on a lock, or how, you know, if we was flanking with the current, different things like that. We'd watch that way, and then the drift was God's gift to pilots. We could watch it. It's a normal or natural help, you know.
Boats up the river and it's stuck in sand. If she don't get deep water, well, you know she'll never land.
In the old days, a large crew of roustabouts did the heavy work of carrying and loading big cargo under the supervision of the mate. The deckhands and mud clerks, so called because they waded in mud to deliver bills and business papers, were pressed into service too. Whether the cargo is cotton, cattle, or tomatoes loaded on an old-time packet, or the 15 barges of a modern diesel towboat, it is the deck crew's job to see that the cargo is handled and delivered to its destination safely.
Calves, livestock, all them kind of things had to be sold at the stockyard in Cincinnati, and they had to be transported there. But you couldn't take them on a train, and you had no road, so you put them on a boat. Well, golly, we'd start down the river, and this farmer, John Jones, he'd have a farm and a dog path down to the river. Bill Jones, right below him, a quarter of a mile, he'd have one. You'd say, well, why don't you both get up here? No, that's my landing. I want that boat to land at my landing.
I have been on boats that had a barge load of Mexican straw hats. We used to tow Spanish moss that was gathered out of the swamps down in Louisiana, I suppose, and put in bales, big bales like cotton, and we took them to Pittsburgh to the furniture companies they used to for padding in cheap furniture.
Now, if you ever fooled with a calf, you know what I mean, because they're like concrete. They stop and put their feet up. Well, they taught you to get a hold of this calf's tail. Now, you can take and twist a calf's tail, and he'll jump on top of that roof. But he'll stand there, and you can pull for a week on him. So I'd grab that tail, and here we'd come in on that stage. Now, we'd do that 15 or 20 times in the morning before we get to Maysville. Of course, that was part of the game. And as I say, you've got 25 cents a day, and you're bored for that.
Comes the big Kate Adams with his headlights down the street, and his side wheels are knocking. Great God, I've been redeemed.
The towboat has never carried passengers or the cantankerous animal cargo of the packets. It has always dealt with large quantities of raw materials. But a barge holding 1,500 tons of grain can be just as bulky as a calf and infinitely more dangerous. The modern mate, with his small crew of 4 deckhands, must get these monsters corralled and lashed together with cables into a unit.
A barge would hit a dock, it would wreck it, or you'd see all these motorboats along the river, all the marinas. If a barge went in there, it would destroy the whole marina if it wasn't caught before it got there. And it happened sometimes. When they hit a bridge, I mean, there's an awful, like we got 23,000 tons going up against the bridge pier. They'll shut the bridge down and check it out.
Another danger is you got your caption line when we're making up tow. That's the line you use to pull the barges together with to make up tow. If you get it too tight or if it gets in a bad strain, it can pop and break. It'll break, and it has tremendous force when it breaks. It swings towards you. What's to hit you, most likely it probably cut you in two everywhere it hits you at. If it hit you on your leg, it'd probably cut your leg off. Hit you in the stomach, it'd probably cut you in half, or it'd hurt you real bad, one or the other.
The barges, including the boat, are about 1,168 feet long, and the tow is 105 feet wide. You got to have enough water. You ain't have to worry about the boat breaking out of it. Because you'll be doing a lot of hard steering, you don't want the boat to come out tow. That's the main thing. In the wintertime, we have ice piled up sometimes. You can't even get out on the barges. That is really dangerous. I mean, like on the head of the tow going into the lock, we have to go out there, and sometimes I've seen the ice pile plumb up over top of it, so high you couldn't even cut it off.
About 350 your flat side now, he's still about 10 wide. About 250 your flat side, you're about 9 wide.
Going into the locks, the deckhands are right down in the chamber on the barges. They tell the pilot how much room he has left by reading out the numbers on the lock wall.
Holding about 2.5 wide, need 10 feet to clear your flat side. Do us dropping down easy, you're about 4 feet wide over here. About 20 feet, be abreast. Okay. Got a line on you. This is a bumper. We weave it out of rope, used to go into a lock. We put it between a barge and the lock wall to absorb some of the shock between the metal and the cement in the lock wall. And the mate showed me how to make these a long time ago. Use them out of line. They absorb a lot of the shock, and after we make them, we put them in the water, drag them in the water for a few hours. It makes them swell up. Gets all these knots become real tight. They'll last for like 6 months or a year. But basically, we use them on our tows in the locks to keep cracking barges and tearing the lock wall up.
In the old days, the mate was supposed to be the meanest, toughest guy on the boat. He needed to inspire respect. Twain describes him as a man of practical sense and a level head. He has opinions and just a perceptible dash of poetry in his composition. He has an easy gift of speech and an oath or two where he can get at them when the circumstances of his office require a spiritual lift.
He could turn the air blue pretty well. And he had to damp it down a little bit when there were lady passengers standing around there, but sometimes they would forget when they would get into a critical situation and let off steam. But they could handle those deckhands pretty well with the vocabulary. They didn't need a whip or a revolver or whatever. Just loud talk generally did the work. And the mate that you could hear the loudest and the farthest was considered the best.
Well, I started 32 years ago, and I come up under some tough mates. You either done what they said or you got off, and they was rough. But, I mean, the mates are not really rough anymore like they used to be. I guess years ago it was a story that the meanest man was the mate. I guess that's the way it was years ago.
And I was as scared of him. I was an old country boy from home, and I was as scared of him as an African lion.
No, I'm not mean.
The old-time steam boilers regularly blew steamboats and men to smithereens. The engineers who ran them were seldom made into legends. Them engineers is all pretty much alike, wrote John Hay. Still, he wrote a song about Jim Bludso, engineer on the Prairie Belle, who died saving the passengers and crew of the burning boat. The song tells us, this is all the religion Jim had, to treat his engine well, never to be passed on the river, to mind the pilot's bell. The engineer on a towboat has always been an important man. The engine room and area even the captain feared to tread. Now the engineer of a towboat reminds me of a trapdoor spider as he lurks in his doorway guarding his domain. He is master there, and woe betide him who would enter without invitation. Today's diesel engines are safe and efficient, but still require attendance, for the heart and soul of a towboat is still its mighty power plants.
Our first boat I was on, I think, as engineer, was about 600 horsepower. And it went to 1,800, then 2,400. Then the horsepower of the boat today is, this present boat is 6,200. In our engine room, we have 2 EMD diesels, which are main engines, 2 generators, one a main generator, one an auxiliary. We have air compressors, water pumps, and a hydraulic system, which have to be maintained and looked after constantly in order to keep the boat in operation. Actually, a boat is like a small city. We have to generate our own electricity, propel our own power. They shove usually 15 barges But you have to keep the engines running at all times. The biggest danger with these engines is fuel getting into the lube oil. How we check this and find it is by watching the oil increase on the dipstick. In order to determine whether it's fuel or water, we smell it. If we can't smell it, then we take our finger and taste it.
If any kind of drift, like the fallen trees that come with high water, snarls the propellers, it can kill an engine or jam a rudder. The engineers and deck crew often join forces for on-the-spot repairs. The mighty props and rudders must be kept free. Without the machinery, a towboat is just a vast steel island floating down the river out of control.
About 2 years ago, and it was high water, floodwater stage in Swift after dark, and one engine went down, and in about 3 minutes the other engine went down, which left the boat totally at the mercy of the swift water. And the captain has no control. He can run and maneuver on one engine, but when both of them go down, there is no control of the rudders or anything. And of course, it being dark and the waters were taking us, we were over in a man's cornfield, and when I looked at the galley window and the willow trees were about to come through the window, I thought it was time to get my life jacket on and my flashlight and be prepared. That was a little too much. I like excitement, but not quite that much.
River cooks have always been noted for their skill. In the luxurious dining rooms of the packets, river captains competed with one another in setting a good table. That tradition continued on the steam towboats like the W.P. Snyder and is carried on today.
Well, you always had plenty of biscuits and cornbread and cooked beans every day and potatoes, but you could have anything that you could think to order. Well, the first thing I never had cooked on a coal stove. And to try to keep a fire in a coal stove and keep it hot enough for biscuits and cornbread and keep wood or coal. And that was all a new experience for me. But I finally managed to do it and could bake just a pretty pan of biscuits as you ever saw.
You have to be very safety conscious of cooking. The stove has a railing around it in case there would be a sudden bump when they're building tow, moving the barges around building tow. This railing prevents the hot pans from falling and coming off the stove. But at home, I used to always like to make a layered Jell-O and Cool Whip dish, but on the boat I found out that the vibration of the boat, it all jiggles together, so there's some dishes that you can't cook on the boat. It's mainly, we do have traditional things on the river as far as your cooking. Sunday's always fried chicken, and Friday is shrimp, and Wednesday night is steak, and Saturday night is steaks.
Coffee pot was on the stove at all times, and they had breakfast, and then they had lunch at 9 o'clock, and then meal at noontime, 11:30, and then lunch again at 3. And one time someone in Cincinnati asked Russell's brother, said, how often did they eat on the brother? And he said, on the boat, and he said 24 hours a day. And that was about true, because you very seldom see a boat without someone isn't coming out of the kitchen door with a big sandwich or a cup of coffee.
S'il vous plaît, fais-moi un jambalaya de chevrette pour souper à soir.
I have a Cajun pilot on here now, Nolan, and of course from Louisiana, and I have learned a lot of the dishes, the Creole dishes, he's helping me to learn.
I asked her please to make a shrimp jambalaya for supper tonight.
Okay, I'll pass that on to Billy Larkin.
William Blender, KBL 941.
Before the radio, communication between boats was done by bell and whistle. A code developed. So many rings or blasts for landing, passing, and determining the right of way. It used to be a point of pride with people who knew the river language to recognize the approach of an important boat by her bell or whistle.
You go down and look at my bell, a little bitty thing about that big around. Back in the old days when they were using the bell, it was a bell huge. You could hear it for miles, you know. Had a big ring to it, but the ones today don't have that. We normally pass by radio. That's our normal procedure anymore. But if your radio's out or for some reason maybe his radio's out, you can't contact him, we can still pass by whistles. Like the one whistle, so you use like a distinguished blast, that sort. But now, if you have the two whistle, then you give them the same length, like so. You know, about 5 seconds between them.
Yeah, when you pass some friend's house or even your own home and you want to get their attention, well, you blow usually a whistle, one long and a short, and then go out and give them that.
River people are a special breed. They can be the most helpful of folks, generous with whatever they have, friendly and hospitable. But they can be ornery and stubborn as well.
Well, the keel boats gave rise to all sorts of legends about heroes and big fighters. Mike Fink is perhaps the best known of these heroes. A traveler coming down on a keel boat stopped at a place called Napoleon, Arkansas, and he got out there and there was a fight going on the levee. So he asked the fellow, he says, "Is this a free fight?" And the gentleman said, "Why, certainly, don't stand on ceremony, go right in." And in a shorter time than it takes to tell, he went in there, had his teeth knocked out, and his eye blacked and his face generally mapped out. And he thought to himself, gee, this is a really fun place. I haven't had so much fun since I left home.
My mother didn't think that steamboating was a very suitable occupation for her hopeful. She thought that I should have ambitions that went farther than the river. She had preconceived ideas from people she'd grown up with, particularly 2 or 3 gals that lived around town there, and I got to know them later on. And they could swear a hole through a brick fence, and she wasn't even allowed to play with them. And this was her whole attitude to the river, was these terrible people.
I had heard that a lot of times rivermen were rough type of characters and everything, but that is not true. First time I got on a boat, this huge guy helped me on with a big black beard, and I was scared to death. I was scared anyway. I'd never been on a towboat in my life. He turned out to be the most gentle, helpful man, or one of them. They all help you. All of them are really nice, polite, and considerate. Not at all like you might picture.
They've said that rivermen are superstitious. Well, certainly we are. You don't want to name a boat starting with the letter M. Just look at all the troubles the Mississippi Queen has had, for example. You don't want to paint a boat blue either. Our own Becky Thatcher in Marietta, Ohio just sank not, was it 2 years ago? It was blue. It is no longer painted blue.
Oh, the superstitions were some of them that they wouldn't let you have peanuts on a boat. And there was another one that you wasn't allowed to have a blue paint. And another one that Captain Green never would allow have a boat with a name that had 13 letters in it.
Some of the old-timers believed not to throw nothing over the head of the tow. And some of the real old pilots, when you went to the pilot house, they'd make you go back out the same door you come in. They were superstitious about that.
You had some scary dreams, okay?
A Nightmare on Elm Street, Part 2. Freddy Krueger is back to visit the old...
Life on a boat has always included some idle hours. There are all sorts of ways to pass the time, to keep from thinking about home.
One of the most difficult things is being away from home, away from your family. Like I said, I got two kids myself, 30 days at a time, 6 months out of a year. Being away from them is rough. It's hard.
Maybe that's why it's good to have a woman cook on the boat that they could maybe open up to more like they could their mom or something. And some of them call me Mom. A lot of times they call me Mom.
If you had good food and treated the men right, well, then their morale was high too. And listened to all their stories about the sick children at home and doctored them when they were sick, and picked the cinders out of their eyes, and so there was just a lot, but it was interesting because nothing looks the same as it does out in the middle of the river.
I've been out on the river 2 Christmases, which that isn't very many. Some men have been here as many as 8 Christmas, you know. The older men try to come back and relieve the younger men with children and let them go home, as many as possible. But of course you can't let everybody. The boats run 7 days a week, year-round. Holidays are hard. In the summer, 4th of July is hard. We pass along the bank and we see people out there, you know, picnicking, boating, fishing, and building fires in the evening. And you get pretty lonesome because you're close enough to see them, and yet you feel like you're a million miles away at the same time, and home seems pretty far away.
Oh, we had some men that just couldn't go by home without just getting off. And one boy especially, he said, I just can't stand it. I just can't stand it. And the one boy was going to retire the next week, and he didn't get off that time. And we went on to Point Pleasant, and he drowned that weekend.
News travels fast on the river, and usually by word of mouth. When something happens in Pittsburgh, it will soon be heard about in Cairo. River people love to talk and to tell stories. There are legends, like the one about a certain Indian, Chief Cornstalk.
Saying where they took over his battlegrounds, and then they killed him, and then they dug him back up and put him down in the monument. He was supposed to put a curse on Point Pleasant, and so many years, you know, a curse was supposed to come upon, which one time the bridge did fall right before Christmas. And then they had the big jail, city jail there blew up, killed a bunch of people. And, well, it flooded one time. And now we're waiting on the next thing to happen.
Yes, I have seen a ghost. I didn't believe that I would ever see one, but I did. There was a boat named the Kanawha that was in the regular passenger trade and freight trade between Pittsburgh and Charleston. And she came down one night and made a landing at a out-of-the-way place called Little Hawking, Ohio. And the pilot, in backing her away, misjudged the thing. It was at night. And he backed her around and hit a pier on one of the dams and ripped the whole side out of the boat.
Well, I'll tell you one about, they used to talk about jack-o'-lanterns. They'd say that one pilot, he says, I'll tell you when you pass that place down there, them jack-o'-lanterns, there's somebody gonna die. Well, I never seen jack-o'-lanterns but one time in my career of boating.
But anyhow, about a month or 2 later, a pilot named Doggy Cross, we called him Doggy. I don't know where he ever got, well, he kind of looked like a dog. But that was his sobriquet anyway, they called him Doggy. Doggy had started seeing a ghost where this wreck had come into the bank down there at Staff Island. And they all put it down as one of Doggy's tall tales, but then other people commenced to seeing this.
The ghost story on the Charles R. Stevenson, now that happened over quite a period of time. First off was my brother was on there, and he come up, was telling me what happened. Well, he was young, so I didn't pay much attention to it. I thought he was having a nightmare or something like that, you know, or dreaming, so I just forgot about it. Then I had another young kid that was on there, and same thing happened to him, but the only thing was different than what happened to him was that he fell in the river up in Huntington. And when he fell in the river, he was telling me that the same face that he's seen in that room, he's seen under the water.
Yeah, I believe it.
But my brother told me that it was so strong in there that when he woke up, that his arm was pulled right out like that, like it was pulling him out of bed. Just a real, you know, a real evil-like face, just staring right at him and smiling at him, and his arm was actually stretched out like that.
Ever since I've been on the river, all the men, they'll tell you about a diver going down below the lock, and they say there's catfish down there that could swallow them. Or, I mean, they're such a tremendous size, they could probably swallow an automobile. And I mean, I've heard that so many times since I've been on the river 32 years, you know. I know what they're going to tell before they tell it.
And I wanted to steer that boat. That was my ambition. That's what I wanted to do. It didn't make any difference about money, this or that. I wanted to steer that boat, and I wanted to be a pilot.
The Ohio River has had its ups and downs. Changes come and go. But in spite of everything, it just keeps rolling along. Somewhat different, but in many ways the same.
I love the river. I could live on a riverbank all the time. I guess it's in our blood. Being raised on it like I've been. J'aime la rivière est dans mon sang.
I guess we do love the river, you know, we wouldn't stay here.
Thought I'd just come out here for a little while, but there's something about the river that if you stay just a little while, you come back. You can't get away from it. I don't know if it's a little Mark Twain in all of us or just what it is, but the river keeps beckoning us back.
It seems like after I'm off 30 days, I'm usually ready to come back. I mean, after you're home 30 days, me and the wife gets the fuss, and then it's time to go back to work.
And they talk about the romance of the river as all being a thing of the past, and it isn't really true because there are never 2 days alike on the river, and it has much appeal.
This program is made possible in part by the Ohio Humanities Council under a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities.